Hi, everyone. Welcome to Phocuswright's yearly webinar discussing our annual series of travel innovation and technology trends. I'm Mike Coletta, Senior Manager of Research and Innovation at Phocuswright, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by some of our veteran travel industry analysts. The trends we're going to be sharing today are based on the reports we published this year, and we'll be giving you a good overview and understanding of the trends, whether you have read or plan to read the reports or not. If you do want to read the reports, which of course I would highly recommend to understand these topics deeply, they're all available in our online library for our research subscribers. And if you're not a subscriber, they're also purchasable individually or as a bundle of all six. And so the screenshot I'm showing here is the landing page for the trend overview report that we published in January, which is where you can purchase the bundle of all reports. And I'll tell you more about how you can access this as well as the individual reports at the end of the webinar. So here are our trend authors for this year. In addition to myself, we have Norm Rose, Lorraine Cilio, Kathy Skitzina-Walsh, and Marcus Schreier. I co-authored a few of the reports, so I'll be presenting on those. And many of our analysts have been writing for us for a long time, decades in some cases. Marcus is a first-timer, so we're glad to have him here with us. And on the webinar today, each analyst will have around 5 minutes to present or co-present their trends. And these are complex topics, so we won't be able to go into great detail. That is what the reports are for, but we will share as many insights as we can. And we'll plan to save about 10 minutes for questions at the end of the session. So please enter your questions in the Q&A panel as we go, because I'll pick some for us to address during that Q&A time at the end, and encourage you to use the chat to comment on anything as we go, but putting the questions in the separate Q&A panel helps us more easily separate them out and then answer them later. So before we get into the trends themselves, I wrote an introduction for that overview report that I showed, which sets some context for the trends. So I wanted to start by sharing a little bit from that. So in that introduction, I noted that uncertainty may be the one word that best captures the ongoing disruption that we've experienced over the past few years, from the pandemic to extreme weather events, inflation, high interest rates, and geopolitical tensions. And what that uncertainty translates to in travel is mainly whether demand is going to continue to hold up or not. But while uncertainty in the world may be increasing, it's clear that at least a couple of things in travel are certain. One is that travel demand is resilient, having shown that it can and will bounce back from even the direst circumstances. And that more than ever, travel businesses that don't embrace emerging technologies are on a path toward obsolescence. And generative AI is clearly the biggest emerging technology to pay attention to, but there are plenty of other developments in travel tech that will influence how travel businesses operate in the coming years. So also in my introduction, I pointed out that this year's World Economic Forum conference in Davos, Switzerland, which was held in January, convened under the theme of rebuilding trust. And they cited the need to address the increasing division and uncertainty that continue to destabilize the world. And while I think that's primarily referring to the political and macroeconomic environment, I talked about how trust is such a crucial theme in travel, because travel can be such a powerful force for good, as we in the industry all know, yet it's a huge and a complicated industry, and we have plenty of our own issues and questions to grapple with. For example, there's the huge amount of trust that's needed and still to be built to work effectively with generative AI in travel on both the consumer side and on the back end. There's the trust needed for travelers to hand over their personally identifiable information in exchange for greater personalization. There's the trust needed for travelers to believe that the industry is doing the right thing when it comes to sustainability, and so much more. So my conclusion was that keeping on top of and ahead of the latest innovations is the bedrock upon which we can understand how to effectively leverage new technologies while establishing and enhancing trust within our ecosystem. And so that's partly why we chose these specific trends and why we think they're so important to pay attention to this year. And here are the 6 trends for 2024 in the order in which they'll be presented, which is simply the order in which the reports were published between January and July. So Marcus will be kicking things off with the first trend, talking about underappreciated technology in travel, where the focus is on virtual and augmented reality, as well as Web3 and the Internet of Things. Then Norm will be presenting our second trend, which is about who should own the customer in travel. And the focus there is on digital identity. Then Lorraine will present our third trend, which is about the trade-offs between sustainability goals and the health of the corporate travel market. And generative AI is important enough that it takes up 2 trend spots. So for our fourth trend, Kathy and I will be focusing on the shorter term time frame of generative AI in travel, with a look back over the past year and a half or so and a short-term look ahead. And for our fifth trend, Norm and I will take a longer-term view of generative AI, looking a few years out or more. And then for our sixth and final trend, Norm and I will be talking about the coming impact of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. And with that, we are ready to jump into the first trend, which is at a crossroads, underappreciated tech and travel. Again, Marcus Stryer is a new author with us this year, and he is chairman at the Meta Foundation, a nonprofit consultancy specializing in hospitality. So Marcus, I can see you. Perfect. Take it away.
Thank you, Mike. Excited to be with you all. Yeah, we believe that travel is currently at a tipping point, balancing traditional ways of doing business with the emerging technologies. Taking AI probably aside for a moment, travel and tourism has been hesitant of investing into larger technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality, the new internet, Web3, Internet of Things. And main reason what we're seeing is probably obviously the cost of integrating new technology. It's the kind of fear of compromising the human touch of travel with technology. But I think it's also the kind of uncertainty. Are we investing into a trend, or is this new technology really securing long-term ROI? What we're seeing in other industries, that they are way past the hype phase of these technologies. Look at retail, creating immersive experiences through virtual reality, entertainment, and how they build global community around their gaming platforms, real estate, adding digital layers to their sales process. And also the numbers, when we look at the statistics, roughly about 1% only is going to startup tech funding towards travel and tourism. So with this report, and we're introducing this report at this time, at this moment of time, because we believe that we are at the crossroads in the industry using and appreciating more emerging technologies. And the reason for that and why this is so important is because there's a huge shift in the consumer demand. What are the travel consumers looking for? Personalized travel, thinking for itineraries that really reflect their preference, their lifestyle, seamless travel, end-to-end experience across platforms, and then also sustainability, new forms of travel to reduce the carbon footprint. And technology will certainly help to meet these new consumer demands. And let's be honest, and let's not forget, the new generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, will certainly take tech-enabled offerings for granted. So in the report, we have a couple of good news for all of you, and we highlighted a lot of practical examples what we see on the horizon. So when you look at virtual reality, augmented reality, so far, probably we would all agree that most VR, AR applications are a little bit underwhelming, probably just replicating physical experiences and only scratch on the surface of what VR is actually standing for. But with the new introduction of hardware, such as Apple Vision Pro, Meta Quest 3, and the better capabilities of 5G internet across the world, that's really a gateway to using VR and AR in a more efficient way for us in travel. And we see a few startups and brands really tapping into this gamified exploration of cultural sites. We saw a huge amount of digital twins of cities and countries recently, and then also like obviously everything we can do back of the house for team training and education. Looking at Web3, most strategies so far in the last couple of years were probably, I want to say, better marketing gimmicks following the NFT hype in 2020, 2021. Now, with better blockchain technology, with more user-friendly digital wallets, that will certainly help us to close the technology gap. And again, here also we see new applications on the horizon. Think about tokenized loyalty, which will certainly change the current earn and redeem loyalty programs. Digital identity will hopefully make travel easier and more secure. And then what I'm personally very excited about it, we will see more innovation that is driven by communities through obviously the decentralized opportunities the blockchain will give us. And then last but not least, how many years we're talking about big data, and sometimes how poorly, unfortunately, we're able to process big data in our industry. And in my specific segment, hospitality, there's probably no industry out there that has more access to consumer, more access to data points, but still sometimes we are poorly executing is. And how many times we get asked when we check in our favorite space, is this the first time you're staying with us? And my hope, and we're seeing this now happening with generative AI, certainly this will help us to leverage data, improve personalization, and then without heavy investment sometimes. So I think travel providers overall should become more incentivized to prioritize further investments in underappreciated tech. And last but not least, as I'm wrapping this up, when you read the report, I think it's really important to keep in mind to balance tech implementation with our genuine human touch in the industry. It's not using technology because technology is available. As we all know, Steve Jobs famously said, consumer experience first, and then you have to backward engineer towards technology. And I think this is very true. But the time is now to really look at these technologies. And with 5G, Gen AI, new hardware, better technology, more user-friendly digital wallets, and so on, we have in our fingerprints right now, really gives us the opportunity to close the technology gap with lower investment and mitigating risk. So thank you for joining us. Enjoy reading the report, and then very much looking forward to your feedback.
Great, Marcus. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate all the work you did to kind of really flush out these underappreciated technologies, talk about where they're at and why they're worth paying attention to. So yeah, thanks again. You can mute and go off video for now until we do the Q&A. And again, for the audience, please note any questions for Marcus or any of the panelists in the Q&A panel. I see a couple come in already, and then we'll try to pose them and address them during the Q&A time. So next is, who owns the customer? How about the customers themselves? Quite an idea. It's by Norm Rose, Phocuswright's Senior Technology and Corporate Market Analyst. So Norm, I see you. Jump in when you're ready.
Thank you, Mike. I guess I'm the one who's been here for decades, so that kind of makes me feel a little old, but maybe a little seasoned. So during this period, for decades, a debate has raged in the travel industry on who owns the customer. But what exactly does that mean, who owns the customer? Well, it really comes down to profiles and preferences. So the suppliers and intermediaries that can collect and therefore kind of own the most data related to the user intent and preferences will be able to deliver the most personalized offerings to the traveler and thus have a foundation and advantage of building long-term relationships and gaining customer loyalty. But what if rather than the supplier or the intermediary owning the customer, the traveler themselves had control over their personal information and decided which suppliers and intermediaries they wanted to share that specific information with? Well, here's where we have the entrance of the concept of self-sovereign identity, or SSI. This basically enables the consumer to manage their personal information themselves behind a verified digital identity and distributed trusted information to sellers of their choice. So digital identity acceptance will be usually, we predict, will probably be driven by a number of factors, and it's going to be a combination of governments and private industry. The concept goes beyond just the simple digitization of documents, such as having your license, your passport, or your boarding pass. And what we're talking about is a full interoperable digital ID system that will be required to truly reap the benefits of frictionless travel, which we've been talking about now for quite some time. The first step is enable a new type of mobile digital wallet. So you might say, well, I have a mobile wallet. I have my Apple Wallet. Well, let's just call those mobile operating system wallets. And what those are right now are just storage devices. So you store credit cards, tickets, boarding. You can use those and interact with them during payments, but it's still basically a storage mechanism. A true mobile software wallet goes beyond that storage and actually contains cryptology to enable secure sharing of digital information. Now, there are a number of examples that I highlight in this report, and you can read the report for some more details, but just to touch upon them briefly, don't have a lot of time to go into depth, but beginning with CETA, Indicio, and Aruba, together they executed a complete closed ecosystem. Basically, arriving in Aruba, you have a digital ID, you go through security and border control, and then basically throughout your journey, every point of contact, whether it's the hotel, whether it's the car rental, has that shared digital identity. It really is quite an amazing example of how this can be done in a closed ecosystem. Another example is IATA during COVID had their travel pass created. And the thing to keep in mind about that travel pass, even though it was around COVID and vaccination, it did use decentralized blockchain technology, the basic underlying foundational technology for digital identity. I'm sure everyone is thinking about Clear when they think about identity, and the company is rolling out some new identity verification using high definition facial recognition. There's a startup called Neoki, who was founded by two Booking.com executives, and they're building identity infrastructure designed to simplify travel with secure and compliant customer data orchestration at any touch point that the customer needs service from. And last but not least is a company called Traveler ID, which was the winner of our sister publication, Business Travel News Business Travel Show in London 2023. And they're bringing digital ID to the corporate travel marketplace. Next slide, please. So in order for this to become reality, though, we need an infrastructure in place. And the key components here are the blockchain, which is a shared immutable ledger for recording transactions and tracking assets and trust. And then we need two other elements. We need issuers of decentralized IDs, or DIDs. And this refers to any person, organization, or thing that, as determined by the controller of the DID, needs to be in place. So if you think about this, it's almost like a safety deposit box where you have two keys. You own one of those keys, one of those crypto keys. The other key is owned by the verifier. And of course, the holders have to have their own D. So just in summary, the role of a robust, flexible, verifiable digital identity is at the heart of automating and personalizing the travel process. And the future, creating the connected trip that we've been talking about again for many years, will become a reality through this technology. Now, the important thing is that we'll have AI play a factor in this as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later during the generative AI session. But the important thing to keep in mind is that this is something that's coming to the marketplace, not just coming to the travel industry. This is coming to society, driven by government, driven by companies. Once we get used to having digital IDs like this and verified capabilities, I think the infrastructure will be in place for us to move forward and really accelerate the frictionless aspects of travel. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. Important topic with a lot of crossover with some of the other trends, as we will see. Next up is Green Dilemma, How Cutting Emissions Cuts into Corporate Travel by Lorraine Cilio, Senior Analyst and the founder of Phocuswright Research. Lorraine, I could see you, so please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So my trend is a little different from the others, but it could also make a big impact. And that is how corporate sustainability goals can influence the future of the travel industry. So we've all heard the news that corporate travel is back or nearly back to 2019 levels. Well, being back to where you were 5 years ago is not exactly a great accomplishment. So what's been in the way? Well, obviously video conferencing has been one culprit, but another big reason setting back business travel is these corporate travel sustainability goals, which for many large companies means pledges to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2040. Now, these pledges are a big deal, and they can make a big impact, positive impact, obviously, on the environment. According to the EPA, transportation is the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for about 29% of the total in 2022. All right, so what to do? Well, it just so happens that the easiest way for corporations to limit greenhouse gas emissions is, and this also includes their scope 3, which is specifically emissions directly from business travel, is, of course, to cut back on air miles. So now thousands of companies have made these pledges. How do we quantify the impact on business travel and travel overall? So one of the things we've done is we've analyzed the US booked air sales data from BTN's Corporate Travel 100 list of 75 of the top US companies where comparable data was available. And we found that volume was still down by 45% in 2022 versus 2019. Now, that decline in dollar terms over the 4-year period, just for those 75 companies, totaled $4.6 billion. Now, yes, most of those companies did plan increases for 23 and 24. So that will close the gap. But pledges towards science-based targets will put a dent in corporate travel for years to come. Another analysis we did of BTN data, some of the biggest air travel spenders, such as JP Morgan and Deloitte, found deep cuts in the percentage of overall travel revenue allocated to air travel in 2022 versus 2019. So, for example, and this is just one example of many, at Boston Consulting Group, where revenue rose 38% over that 3-year period, the percentage of revenue allocated to business travel went from 2% in 2019 to about 1% in 2022. So in our next slide, we see that not all meetings can be replaced by Zoom or Teams. So corporations have had to come up with some creative solutions for cutting back on air spend. And these are results of a 2023 survey by BCD of travel buyers, and found that for about half, the number one way that they are looking to reach their sustainability goals is just by reducing the number of trips. And that is tied by using the train instead of the plane. We also see a little over 4 in 10 said using direct flights instead of connecting was another method, which actually would add to the travel budgets. And again, 4 in 10 saying combining several trips into one or having longer stays was their way to reach their goals. So who is at risk and what's next? Now, there are no strict laws in the US preventing corporations from flying as much as they like. But public companies are required to disclose, this is in the US, to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions to the public. There are stricter laws, of course, in Europe. However, even that rule only goes so far, as most companies do not have to report their scope 3 business travel emissions, which I had said earlier constitutes for their overall carbon imprint. And these rules do vary by state. So ultimately, for now, it is up to companies to do the right thing. And most do, especially public companies that are exposed and analyzed by all of us. But many don't. An annual report by Transport and Environment Group said that 85% of global companies have failed to set ambitious goals. Who's most at risk? Well, number one is companies that are really 100% dedicated to the corporate market or the business market. And I say that because, the leisure market has really been leading the surge over the past few years, way ahead of 2019 goals. So if you're specifically looking at the corporate market, you're just not seeing those growth rates that you have if you're also are serving the leisure market. But number two is also suppliers and other partners that just simply can't guarantee that they will help corporations in their mission to reduce their carbon imprint, especially as more companies add sustainability requirements to RFPs and service agreements. Suppliers that can't pass these monthly reviews will be out of luck. So the bigger question is, what will be the overall impact on corporate travel for years to come? Well, the rebound after COVID, higher prices and growing demand have made up for some of the billions in travel spend cut from budgets. But as soon as the economy weakens, or if it weakens, corporations will have a great excuse to be cutting back on spend. And that great excuse is called the environment. And that will play out if and when demand wanes. So when we think of corporate travel in years to come, there are many variables to consider that might continue to give leisure travel the edge. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Lorraine. Lots of great insights on the sustainability and the corporate travel market. So appreciate it. You can mute, turn off your video. Perfect. And then we have our two trends on generative AI. One, as I mentioned, takes a shorter term view, and the other takes a longer term view. I co-authored both of these reports with Kathy and Norm, so I'll be co-presenting them. First up is From Buzzword to Bottom Line, Keeping Pace with Generative AI in Travel. And Kathy Skitzina-Walsh is Senior Research Analyst with us. So Kathy, please kick this one off for us, and then I'll take over.
Great, thank you, Mike. Generative AI has absolutely been one of the hottest topics in travel over the past 18 months. We've seen new models, new tools, new multimodal capabilities, really almost sometimes daily, weekly, from OpenAI and Microsoft, as well as competitors like Alphabet, Amazon, Anthropic, Cohere, many others. But as you know, emerging technology comes with a lot of hype and hyperbole. So we really set out to dig deeper to find out what have travel companies learned so far, really to understand what's working and what's not. In the long term, the goal, of course, is to focus on the best use cases for travel and ideally avoid wasting resources on things that really aren't going to have a clear ROI. Turns out this is really a long-term and ongoing process of trial and error. What our research showed is that travel is still very early in that process. And in fact, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It's very company-specific. Factors like industry sector, customer type, business model, tech capabilities, and especially access to unique data are all going to influence use case selection, what really makes a difference for an individual company. So let's look at some of the ways travel companies have implemented Gen AI so far. Early on, some did launch ChatGPT plugins, or more recently, custom versions of ChatGPT called GPTs. Notably, Kayak has been one of the more popular GPTs. These are searched via OpenAI, but most travel companies have been primarily focused on integrating Gen AI into their own assets, into their own websites, apps, and internal operations. So just a few examples. Expedia introduced EG Labs, where users can test early stage products, including Project Explorer, a Gen AI-powered trip planner. Kayak introduced a few different things, one of which is the Ask Kayak bot, allowing travelers to initiate or narrow down searches using natural language. Priceline integrated its Gen AI chatbot Penny throughout the shopping process, and Trip.com launched a travel assistant called Trip Genie. These are just a few examples. There are, many more, but more broadly, there's a few common themes we've seen in the types of applications that travel companies have focused on so far. So first, on the consumer side, chatbots and virtual assistants. This is an obvious application. Chatbots, of course, are nothing new, but we're starting to see more capable Gen AI-powered bots roll out in multiple phases of the travel process. So discovery and itinerary creation is a popular one, especially with some startups we've seen, which I think Mike may touch on a bit, but to shopping and booking, as well as post-purchase, where chatbots are able to relieve some of the pressure on live customer service agents. Some of the other consumer uses we're tracking include review summaries. Companies like TripAdvisor, Expedia, Home to Go, Make My Trip have used Gen AI to provide users with summaries of review sentiment. You see that in various search results starting to pop up as well. Another key use is accessibility, including multimodal and translation capabilities. Make My Trip is one example, using Gen AI for voice to text translation. They're dealing with a market in India with many languages, both official and unofficial. So just making their services more accessible to a broader swath of the population. Also using hybrid interaction using voice and visual options. On the back end, for back end and internal operations, travel companies are using Gen AI in a few different ways. In customer service, to automate customer service call summaries. It's also being used to support customer service agents, helping them respond to questions using techniques such as RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which I think also Mike may touch on. But one of the biggest benefits is definitely enhanced productivity, especially in the area of coding. Airbnb estimates that its employees, led by developers, could be 30% more effective in the short to medium term, which is, that's a big increase in productivity. So these are some of the key applications travel companies have focused on so far, which leads me to a crucial question: what's the ROI? There's a lot of things you can do with Gen AI, but may not necessarily be the best way to accomplish the goal. And the question always is, is this beneficial? Well, the results are mixed so far. Travel companies have indicated that Gen AI powered products are having a few benefits depending on the company: saving customers time, getting them deeper into the funnel more quickly, driving engagement, and in some cases, boosting revenue. TripAdvisor has said that travelers who use its AI-powered Trips tool had higher return rates, and Trips users generate 5 times higher average revenue compared to the typical member. Make My Trip has said that users who engage with their AI features have higher conversion rates. But on the other hand, Expedia says its ChatGPT integration has had minimal impact on either revenue or conversion. And it was interesting to hear Expedia's former CEO, Peter Kern, say bluntly late last year that the opportunity for AI to plan an entire trip is, quote, grossly exaggerated. So most of the travel applications we've seen so far have focused on the lowest hanging fruit. We're going to keep tracking what's working, what's not, as travel companies start to tackle some of the more ambitious projects, which my colleagues are going to dig into in the next couple presentations. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. That's a perfect way to frame things for me. And so I've spoken a lot this year already about AI, given all the research I've been doing for these 2 reports. And something that's persisted as top of mind for me is whether generative AI will be a net positive or negative for Google. Because Google's such an important company in travel, and they have a lot to lose if they don't get generative AI right. And so far, they seem to be struggling a bit, having had some pretty big public blunders. A lot of you might have seen the examples of America's founding fathers or the suggestion of adding glue to pizza to make it stick. But even if and when they solve these issues, the biggest thing that seems like it could be a net negative for them is how it puts their business model under pressure. Because when AI can provide users with answers directly rather than sending them to websites to look for answers on their own, that means less clicks are happening, which means less revenue for Google. And it also means the ecosystem of companies that depend on traffic from Google could lose a lot of that traffic and thus revenue, publishers of information in particular, and possibly product intermediaries. Really have to see how that all plays out. But Google does play the long game. Travel is an important sector for them, and they are pushing further and further into travel with a stated focus on trip planning for their Gemini product. And this is a screenshot of Gemini Advanced, which is a particularly useful tool for travel, allowing natural language conversation while directly interfacing with your personal Gmail, Google Docs, Google's flights and hotels products, as well as Google Maps and YouTube. And these are all products that people use frequently for trip planning. And I went into more depth on this in a recent webinar called Tripped Up. So if you Google that and you want to watch that webinar, we talk about trip planning in general and startups and Google and AI. But so the net positive here for Google would be that Gemini could capture an even larger share of travel planning and shopping traffic and keep it in their environment, and they'd figure out how to monetize it more and more as time goes on. But the biggest hurdle for not just Google, but for generative AI overall is hallucinations, or the tendency of large language models to produce inaccurate or misleading information that they present as fact. And again, going back to my opening theme, this is the biggest factor in establishing trust in these tools. So currently, the best way for travel companies to leverage the power of large language models while reducing hallucinations is to employ retrieval augmented generation, abbreviated as RAG, which Kathy mentioned. And that's a process that optimizes LLM responses via reference to external knowledge bases in an effort to ensure that consistent and reliable information is passed to the end user rather than something the LLM might have made up. And using proprietary information that way, that's what can make an implementation of generative AI stand apart and create competitive advantage versus the LLMs directly, as well as other companies in your direct space. So for every company's unique product and customer base, when you employ RAG and you supplement your proprietary information, that's you reduce hallucinations and you can differentiate your implementation. So those are the benefits of using RAG, retrieval augmented generation. And the easiest way to experiment with RAG is to play with OpenAI's GPTs, which Kathy touched on. And they are custom versions of ChatGPT that you can supplement with external data and configure to achieve specific goals. And GPTs are a precursor to autonomous agents, which Norm and I will cover in depth in the next trend, which is about the longer term impact of generative AI. So that does bring us to True Automated AI in Travel is Coming by Norm and myself. Thank you again, Kathy, for your part. And Norm, I'll pass it over to you first for this one.
Well, we're actually in another hype cycle that you may or may not be aware of, which is the hype around autonomous agents. And it really has emerged as kind of a standout aspect of generative AI over the last year. And the distinction between an autonomous agent and traditional AI systems lies in the level of independence and decision-making capability. Autonomous agents can analyze and interpret data, learn from experience, and execute actions without constant human supervision. And unlike standard AI, which follows strict rules, autonomous agents decide the next move based on their surroundings and goals. The idea of an intelligent assistant to help with mundane tasks is easy to accept. But what if there are some high tasks, performing high stake tasks such as shopping or even booking travel on your behalf? I think that many would agree that that is a little disheartening, and how much we want that autonomous agent to really act on our behalf and what's going to be the liability of its actions. These are all things as generative AI and the future of generative AI emerges, we're going to have to deal with. But a true automated booking process, well, I've been around, I've been in the industry over 40 years. I have to tell you that we thought that initially online travel agents and online booking tools in the corporate market would digitize the whole experience, but often it's turned the traveler into a travel agent or the admin into a travel agent. So the concept of autonomous agents holds the promise of really automating the process. So you have a calendar entry and the agent goes off and retrieves information for this trip based on your itinerary. There's also a connection with digital ID that I mentioned a little bit earlier, because if you think about it, if you have autonomous agents who can act on your behalf, understanding your preferences and making something truly personalized is really going to be the key here. So autonomous agents need to perform these tasks, but do it in a way that meets your needs and really gives you a surprising experience and a more personalized experience. So the question then becomes, I believe we're on the next slide, who's going to own the autonomous agent? Who's going to do this? Well, obviously we have the big players like Google, who has all the information of your searching, your calendars, and your emails if you use them, or your YouTube activity. And so they certainly can be very well positioned to offer personalized travel planning. And of course, in their demo, when they introduced their generative AI next generation, they used travel as an example. Microsoft, another big player, and as you are well aware, we've had generative AI implemented in Copilot, and there is already, a booking relationship with Amadeus through Microsoft Teams. And so I think, that's a very logical step, especially for the corporate market. Meta sees an opportunity to introduce AI agents to billions of people. This is a quote from Mark Zuckerberg. And these billions of people in a way that will be useful and meaningful for their lives. So he is very much looking at this. Of course, he has the advantage of having all the social media data in order to create true digital spaces for travel planning if he sees fit. OTAs seem to be well positioned as well. They certainly have some experience with large language models, and they could conceivably offer autonomous agents on your behalf. And I think that corporate travel, which is an area that I spend a lot of time in, is a prime example of where this may actually happen first, because of the fact that there's high frequency and repetitive trips that people could then just easily duplicate using this. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Norm. Could go on mute and off video or just stay, since you'll be speaking on the next one too. But so for me, thinking longer term about generative AI is super interesting, because I've been using it a lot, in the past year and a half, become a believer that it will be epically disruptive. But as a researcher, I try to take an overall neutral point of view, because nobody still really knows how it'll play out, how good these models will get. And that includes future regulation and how that could affect its trajectory. On regulation, there are already some lawsuits going on for use of proprietary and trademark content in training the models, which could be consequential. I won't go too much into that. I just wanted to reiterate what Norm hinted at, which is that things will likely get even more murky as we wade deeper into the territory of autonomous agents taking actions for which there could be even more liability. And then in terms of more profound implications to think about when it comes to AI and automation, the impact on the workforce is top of mind for me, because there's obviously a lot of potential to augment the work that people do, but there is potential for job replacement too. And there are lots of other things to think about as we journey into the future, and I have some separate slides on those. So firstly, I'd like to convey that some of the visions for autonomous agents represent a near total upheaval of the shopping and buying process. So one vision is that we'd all have our own personal autonomous agents that would broadcast our needs to the market when we're, say, shopping for something, and they would interact with autonomous agents from sellers, and the agents would sort of negotiate, and your agent would make sure you got the best deal that fully meets your specified needs, and could even complete the transaction or bring the offer back to you to review before purchasing. So I think everyone in commerce, all across commerce, should start giving some thought to how would your business operate in that type of world? What might you need to do to start preparing technically? But even just following kind of what's going on here may or may not be super realistic. But a lot of people think this is the way things are going, and it may not be that far off. 5 years even is not that long. And so on the screen is some recommended reading on this concept to understand it further. So autonomous agents could be these bots that go out on the web and do things for us, but they could also be more like a real travel agent. So this is a screenshot from a company called Soul Machines, which has this travel agent avatar named Vesper that you can have a fairly natural verbal conversation with, visually. And I tried a lot of these tools. I was pretty impressed with this one when I tried it, and how it felt quite natural. It'll, wait while you're thinking about something, and then you can follow up with the conversation. I don't know. There's something different about it than using chat. And right now it's just a verbal conversation, kind of the two of you talking, but I can imagine that soon she'll be able to show maps, show photos of hotels and destinations, show flight prices, etc. And then I imagine, she'll be able to do that in vivid 3D detail using your Apple Vision Pro, probably not too far in the future, I think virtual reality is in the Apple Vision Pro, it's kind of limited to who'd really want to use it, but younger generations more and more might if it's really that compelling. And then you can imagine if this agent was powered by one of the tech giants, which knows everything about you, as Norm touched on, just imagine how much it could customize what you want and its recommendations for you up front and help you make decisions, and then go and book everything for you. And then on the workforce, there are already some clear signs of both job augmentation and displacement. So on the left is a headline from February of this year about fintech firm Klarna, which caught some flack for directly publicizing how they replaced 700 customer service agents with an AI assistant. And on the right is a screenshot from a guide to how to build your own synthetic employee, which was just published in April. So, this is all starting to be possible and even starting to happen. And then we all generally talk about generative AI in terms of software, but humanoid robots are coming and they'll be powered by generative AI too. They already are. So this is an article from the beginning of the year about mobile Aloha that caught my eye. This is a robot that can do very complex tasks requiring good dexterity. And this is not the only one, but some of the examples given here are cooking shrimp, pushing chairs, using a cabinet, wiping wine, calling an elevator, and even high-fiving. So got me thinking about uses in hospitality. And I just think, again, it's important for people to start thinking about autonomous agents and robots in terms of how further automation may affect or will affect their corner of the industry, including the possible impact on productivity in jobs, like I said, especially in hospitality for tasks such as cooking and cleaning in the case of these robots. And there are strong arguments to be made that travel agent avatars will never equal a human agent's abilities, especially to plan a complex trip, and that robots can never replace humans for so many tasks. I think it's a very worthy debate. So we hosted that debate at Phocuswright Europe in Barcelona a few weeks ago, and I encourage you to go watch that session on YouTube. I'm taking a little extra time here, but I really wanted to show this LinkedIn post from a founder who said she was in this off-record conversation, but was allowed to share that in this conversation, the NVIDIA CEO, NVIDIA makes all the chips for AI, said that we're heading toward a future where all code will essentially be API calls to large language models, with those LLMs in turn calling other LLMs. And that the best startups she's seeing are fundamentally reliant on LLMs, which are becoming critical infrastructure. So again, I thought I wanted to share this. It's just great food for thought. But to end with a dose of reality, this is the Gartner hype cycle for AI for 2023. And this was published in August of 2023, so almost a year ago. And it shows generative AI right at the peak of inflated expectations at the top of the curve there. And then what's next? It's that long downhill crash that typically happens with emerging technologies, which is what could play out, and I would say is even starting to play out. Over the next 2 to 5 years, Gartner even says 5 to 10 before we actually reach that plateau of productivity. I think it's really hard to generalize about this. It's going to vary very much based on the area of the travel industry in particular. For example, customer service automation is already happening, while higher risk areas will take much longer. But the bottom line is that it really still is very early overall for generative AI, and it's kind of a long way to go. That's it for that one. The sixth and final trend is on central bank digital currencies. So Norm, please come back and kick this one off, and then I'll bring it home.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Well, let's face it, cryptocurrency has gone through the fad, the buzz cycle numerous times, causing many to dismiss its relevancy, especially given the high-profile fraud and failures in the crypto industry. However, something that may be going unnoticed by many in the travel industry is the fact that central banks of many nations have begun issuing digital currencies of their own. These central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, have many characteristics that are similar to cryptocurrencies, but as opposed to kind of the decentralized nature of cryptocurrencies, these are fully centralized, created, promoted, and controlled by existing central banks. So I wanted to just kind of clarify very briefly the types of digital currencies out there so that we're all talking about the same thing. So I think everyone's familiar with cryptocurrencies. They're most familiar, most overhyped, often misunderstood form of digital currencies, very notorious for being very highly volatile, with Bitcoin and Ethereum being the most recognizable of tens of thousands on the marketplace. And though you may think the crypto market is dead, it's actually, and it is relatively small, but it does represent 2.6 trillion with a T of investment as of April 2024. Another type of digital currency is something called a stable coin, and those are tokens on the blockchain that are pegged to and redeemable for fiat currencies such as the US dollar. Stablecoins can offer near instant transfers, self-custody, and peer-to-peer payments, all powered by the blockchain without the volatility of the cryptocurrency. So if you have stablecoins, they stay stable. Hopefully, if they don't fail, as one major one did a couple of years ago. So lastly, but really the focus of this session is on CBDCs, which are digital currencies backed and issued by a central bank. And according to the Atlantic Council's CBDC tracker, 134 countries and currency unions representing 98% of global GDP are exploring CBDCs. 98%. And in May 2020, the number was 35. So many are in exploration, development, and some have launched. And various countries are at different stages around the world. Some large countries such as China and India have launched their own CBCD. And other regions such as the Eurozone are in a research phase. Now, there is a connection between CBDCs and digital ID, is that, the more that we see digital currencies become, part of this, is more likely the governments are going to offer digital identity also as part of this. Recently, I saw a article where the Defense Department is going out for bid for a digital ID. So the connection between central bank currencies and digital ID is there as well. And then the question then, how should companies prepare for this? So to prepare, what you need to do is evaluate global markets and recognize those that are advancing. In interviews that I had conducted for a global payment project, which you'll see the results of that coming out very shortly. In India, all the OTAs are very much aware of these central bank digital currencies and work with them. Joining working groups such as European central banks call for candidates to participate in digital euro scheme infrastructure related to requirements. Why do we have to get involved? Well, one of the aspects of the digital euro that was proposed was a limit on how much could be spent with the digital euro of, I think, a couple of thousand digital euros, which may not be enough for a more expensive trip. So we need to be involved as an industry. Last, we recommend that you assign a small team or individual to become educated about CBDCs and track their progress, contribute to a strategy and acceptance overall. So I'll just touch upon some of the pros that we see in the marketplace, is that the idea of financial inclusion, particularly for the unbanked, is important. The the idea of competition and incentivizing cheaper access to money, foreign transfers or cross-border payments are still a very, very high cost in the industry, and this could solve some of that problems. Efficiency in payments, with lower transaction costs, improved transparency and money flows for easier shaping of monetary policy, and improved cross-border payments, reducing friction. But there are some concerns, right, Mike?
That is right. Yeah, thanks for that, Norm. And yeah, I wanted to take the cons section on this because I feel pretty strongly that the potential downsides of CBDCs are extremely significant. And I want to talk about that a little bit. So one of the most significant is the implication for consumer financial privacy, and that governments would have full visibility into what people are spending their money on. But actually, the most significant concern would be the programmability of CBDCs, because governments and even possibly private companies, in the case where they're the provider of the wallet being used, could have the ability to restrict or completely turn on and off spend at their discretion. There's also huge barriers to adoption and acceptance, I think largely because of these issues, but others too. And some of those are just the things that need to be, make sure they're handled properly, ensuring the security of digital wallets, ensuring that the system is truly scalable, and ensuring that it would be usable in the case of a power failure, since it would be fully digital. And another big one, what if this centralized financial system was hacked? Because in our current banking system, hacks are generally limited to a single institution, that naturally limits the amount of damage that can be done in those scenarios, but that damage could be worse, with a fully centralized system. So a few different cons, but again, the main issue to me is that programmability, and thus the control that CBDCs grant to authorities. So, most governments have said that they wouldn't phase out cash or the banking system, and that CBDCs would just be an additional optional payment layer. And that likely would have to be true, at least in the short to medium term, because this would be a very long kind of transition process to get people using digital wallets and digital cash across the board. But it does seem like people aren't really buying it so far, because the two countries that have been furthest ahead, as Norm mentioned, India and China, have really struggled to see adoption. They saw some initial adoption, and then it's dropped off. So I think that shows that hesitancy to use the currencies, and even maybe just kind of a lack of benefits that people really see. So they've kind of reported that the results of those initial pilot programs have just been disappointing. And then in China in particular, some of the more dystopian scenarios seem to be playing out. It can be kind of hard for us to verify information kind of coming out of China, but there are many reports of people's ability to spend being cut off for rather minor infractions. And Norm, you kind of touched on that too, even with the digital euro having that spending limit, I think is already kind of controversial. So you see kind of the seeds of this a little bit. And in the US, these potential issues and this hesitancy led to the House recently passing the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act to try to ban the Federal Reserve from issuing a CBDC. The main stated concern there was that it could be weaponized to control Americans. And, on that, this is the kind of topic I think it could get politicized, as so many important topics do. I really hope it won't be that way. We can and should all be able to rationally evaluate these pros and cons. And that's really what this is about for me, just trying to spread awareness on this issue so we can have the discussion. And for anyone who wants to kind of dig a little deeper into the downsides and the risks, this is some recommended reading. This is from the Cato Institute, and it does a good job of outlining kind of a lot of information and evidence in one place. I had a quote there I'm going to skip, but I just want to tie this to travel. Actually, before we get to the Q&A on CBDCs, I've seen the idea floated that people could be kind of forced to make more sustainable choices, such as their ability to spend on travel being limited if they emitted too much carbon by traveling too much. And then, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but another big problem with fiat currency is the ability of central banks to just print too much of it. which has all kinds of terrible effects. And that is why Bitcoin in particular is so interesting to so many people due to its fixed supply. But I digress. This is the kind of thing where I really kind of hope I'm wrong about the potential for CBDCs to be abused. Or maybe I'm just wrong that programmability is a bad thing. Maybe we do kind of need to force people to change their behavior by sort of punishing them. This is the kind of things I love thinking about, things that have huge impact on society as well as the industry. And I'm more than happy to continue to discuss and debate further. So please do reach out to me on LinkedIn about this, or really any of the topics. And then we will have some time in the Q&A to discuss more. But bottom line with CBDCs is that potential for abuse is indisputable. So I wanted to take this opportunity to encourage everyone to carefully weigh the pros and cons themselves as these things roll out, and to fight if and as necessary to ensure that CBDCs are implemented responsibly so we can experience all the pros and none of the cons. And that is all 6 trends. Oh yeah, so that we're on that Q&A slide right at about an hour, but the analysts are happy to stay on and address questions. So everyone could turn on their video and audio again. I know Kathy probably has to drop off. And then I saw lots of questions come in, many of which were addressed. I see Norm, you answered some, Marcus. So were there any that you guys answered there in the Q&A but would like to speak a little bit more about and address? Norm or Marcus?
I answered one about NDC and hotel bookings and so forth for corporate travel. So it's kind of outside the trend. So if that person would like some more information, please go ahead and contact me. We can talk a little bit more.
There actually you didn't answer. So this is from Sergio. What needs to happen for SSI to become mainstream? There are different large initiatives, the EU for one, but the fact that decentralized IDs are available does not mean that operators will support them. Brilliant concept, but harsh change in customer engagement. And I have some thoughts on that too, but you could go first if you like.
Well, I think you hit the issue right on the head here. Is without the industry accepting this and implementing the verification of the ID, we don't really have a two-sided. It's like having that safety deposit box with one key. You never get to open the box. So the bottom line is, what's the motivation? Why would the industry adopt this? Well, I did a series of presentations for a conference earlier this year in Atlanta, where I took people through various scenarios where self-sovereign identity could have an impact. So I'll just give you one as an example here. If you're a supplier, all you know about that individual's activity is what they've done with you. If that individual said, hey, listen, I have done this much with your competitor, would you like to give me a deal? So, we're talking about airline merchandising and retailing and the whole, change in the way airlines want to distribute their product. Well, if they want to make something more personalized, they need a 360-degree view of the customer. Well, they won't have it if they continue to only rely on their information. They're just talking to their own audience rather than getting new audience. That's the same for hoteliers. It's the same across this. So if we have an ability for individuals to share important information that let that supplier perhaps get incremental revenue, get incremental business, and certainly understand the needs. Hey, the customer's coming, they're driving an electric vehicle, they rent an electric vehicle, therefore I need to make sure I have a charging station at my hotel available. These types of things will help enhance the environment, enhance the way that you think about it, and it really is at the bottom line. So I am optimistic that the industry will wake up and see this, but I do see this as more of a government and on the corporate travel side, maybe happening first because there's a value of having independent profiles as a corporation that is not controlled by the GDS, the TMC, or the OBT. And so I think we'll see some traction there. But for the infrastructure to be in place, it's going to take years and it's going to take community efforts. I would encourage you to check out the Decentralized Identity Foundation, DIF. There's a special interest group, a SIG, that was created. I was one of the founders some years ago. I'm not actively involved at this point, but there's a group that meets every week to talk about self-sovereign identity and how that's going to be implemented in the travel industry. So join and help us move this forward rather than just sit there and say, well, it's not going to happen. It's going to happen if we provide value to the industry. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, I think that was very well said. People need to understand the benefits of it first, and that's part of why we're doing this. I would add, I think it's traveler ID that is addressing the corporate market first, as you mentioned, and I think the thinking there is that corporations can implement this as policy, which should help drive that initial adoption, and those people would then kind of get used to it, and hopefully it could expand out from there. So I think that's a good approach. Did you have any other thoughts, Marcus, or we can move to a different question?
I just maybe wanted to highlight a great comment from Pablo when we spoke about the evolution of Web3, mentioning Camino as a great example as a consortium blockchain platform for travel, which we exactly had as a case study also in the report. So that's great point out from Pablo. And then we had a few questions on how virtual reality is becoming kind of more widespread. And I think the answer to this is it's definitely the introduction of the new hardware, which is always important. More user-friendly hardware, which we have seen with Apple Vision Pro and Meta Quest 3. And then also encouraging everyone in the call and in your day-to-day is like thinking about virtual reality really as an add-on to the physical experience, where a lot of times we see like just a replication of a physical experience. And I think if you want to sell a travel destination, consumers expecting a little bit more. Is it retail? Is it experiences to really come regularly back in a VR environment? So with the hardware and more sophisticated experiences, I think that's really the way forward, but it's already there and it's already happening.
Yeah, it seems to me it's going to take a long time for VR, like the younger generation, kind of naturally embrace it with gaming. And as they get older and start traveling more, they'll be more inclined to use it for travel, whereas older generations, I think, just are turned off by that, by strapping a helmet on your head. Even I thought I was impressed with it 5 years ago, and I haven't used it since. So it's just not that compelling yet, but it's getting more compelling over time, and more people I think will use it. I guess you were addressing part of maybe Jason's question about AI generated video and VR. So on AI generated video, I think that's super interesting because I see the potential for hyper-personalized marketing there, right? The idea that you don't just create a video that's like a commercial that plays for everybody, that when you can tie all of these kind of personalization, identity, etc., together and all these data points, you could create one-to-one videos that really speak to people. So that's a super interesting idea. I think we haven't really scratched the surface of yet. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I've used Synesia, which is a UK company that does these avatars, and I actually used it for that presentation in Atlanta I was talking about, and they're really quite amazing as far as how they look. And I did that very thing. I had a personalized message to the individual traveler that was delivered by an avatar. So I think you're right about this. Of course, we have the whole deep fakes and the misuse of images and voices and so forth that we have to deal with, which is also. And if I may, since I started to address fraud there a moment ago, there was a question from someone, an anonymous attendee, about really mitigating risk on higher risk transactions and so forth. This is the real bottom line when it comes to autonomous agents, and this is what's going to prevent this from, I think, taking off in a big way until this can be solved. But I think that what we're going to see, just like we see with generative AI, I think the autonomous agents will become assistants. Go out and fetch a bunch of options for me. And depending on how good those options are and how they treat my personal preferences, it may become then me who makes the booking, because I want to control that last piece. And so that last piece of making the booking may be very far ahead. But there's going to be bad actors out there using this technology in compromised ways that could lead to a lot of problems. This is why it's kind of being talked about a lot of hype in the AI community, but I think there's a lot of concern that we all have moving forward. To just answer that attendee's question.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar in that I think the choice to transact can always be up to the user and how you want to enable the agent. And maybe at some point when you trust it enough, you'll let it go book things. But I think that points to the connection with digital ID again, because the question was part of it was what controls will be used to identify a potentially fraudulent entity interacting in this channel. There's so much fraud, so that's where digital ID, verified users interacting with verified services from retailers, suppliers, could maybe even eliminate fraudulent transactions there. But we have to get to that point where enough people are using the digital ID and these technologies. Which, any guesses on when that would be? And that's still got to be 5 to 10 years. We're not that close.
Yeah, so I mean, all these things have to work in concert, and we're talking about how are we going to see exceptions of the acceptance of digital IDs. Well, perhaps this will drive that exception because we need to verify that this is the person that the bot is acting on behalf of and not a fraudulent person. So yeah, it's all emerging, and all these things are going to have to come together. But for us to pay attention in the travel industry now is important, and for us to get involved and kind of contribute our perspective is very important.
Yeah. Heavier one, do you believe that the use of AI technology will lead to a dehumanization of society, particularly in the tourism and hotel sector? This is from Tomislav. I think there's an argument to be made that the human connection will be made that much stronger and valuable, high quality experiences. Just that, somebody who's a great storyteller giving a great tour probably could never be replaced. But I think there'll be some of this. There's potential for people to take tours just using an AI tour guide in an autonomous vehicle. Using your Meta sunglasses is one of the things I've been kind of looking at recently. Like how well does that work? How well would that work? So, it could definitely go both ways. And Marcus, you had talked a little bit certainly about this in your report. I don't know if you have more thoughts, and especially with your focus on hospitality.
Yeah, I think that the challenge is always like how this new technology is advertised, right? So when Metaverse was coming out, everyone thought all the kind of experience happening in a new virtual world. When AI came out, we all obviously there's a fear of it's dehumanizing, it's replacing human force, which I think over time there's always and I think Norm was talking about, there's always a challenge and there's always something we have to be mindful. But overall, I totally agree that I think let's use emerging technologies to enhance the human experience, and we see this in so many examples, and it helps innovation. And there is certain elements in travel and tourism in particular where I don't think, at least for the next foreseeable years, AI will be able to take over the human touch point. I think it's better to not just to be there and stuck in fear, but using the opportunity and try to benefit from it.
And if I could just add something, I'm sorry, Norm.
No, go ahead, Lorraine.
But I mean, obviously, the research shows, and we know it's the joy of the hunt, right? In terms of the planning, that is, part of the trip. We don't want the machines to make that decision for us. I don't think that's going to change.
Which is actually one of the other questions.
Yeah. We just did some research on that. We just got the survey back, and one of the questions we asked was about whether travel planning is frustrating, or and getting a level on that. So that's something we'll be sharing soon.
The other aspect I was going to say is, think about room service and delivery services now. The experience, I used to look forward sometimes to being in my hotel room. I had work to do and ordering room service and having a full menu. And that's changed quite a bit. And part of that's driven, from my perception, is the hoteliers themselves trying to save money. And this is where the danger is that if you look at AI as a way to eliminate headcount and to somehow save money, you're often then sacrificing the personal touch of the human. And so there has to be a balance there between how it's being used, and think about it more as, as Kathy and Mike were talking about, more as an assistant to help your staff to be smarter, rather than eliminating headcount and everything's going to be automated, as we saw with the example with Klarna. It's not necessarily a real positive if you're, eliminating a lot of jobs and everything's going to be automated, but sometimes the automation's not quite up to speed.
Yeah, one other thought, I've actually kind of touched on this in other presentations and webinars. It strikes me that Elon Musk, as well as Jeffrey Hinton, who's deemed the godfather of AI, have talked about how no jobs will be needed in the future. Jeffrey Hinton has advised everyone to start thinking about a career as a plumber, even though maybe robots would do that, I would think. But, that's sort of a dark vision of the future, but I tried to put a positive spin on it. If that were the case and robots and agents did everything and nobody had to work, we'd all have plenty of free time to travel. So that would be really great for the travel industry, right?
As long as it's
Assuming we have
sustainable
our
travel.
assuming we have our universal basic income or something to pay for it, which is something will probably be a trend next year. I really want to start digging into that scenario. Somebody asked, I have a question about the paradox of choice with generative AI tools. Everybody's used to choosing. I think we addressed that, that people actually do enjoy the kind of shopping part of it. Not everybody. That was even something that I talked about too in the trip planning webinar that I did a couple of months ago, and presented some research that we've done previously about how people actually, for the most part, enjoy that kind of the hunt of finding the best price and just browsing different websites and looking at pictures, etc. So, that is something that's really a huge question. Marcus, it says you would like to answer that question. Oh, that's what I think you were already talking about.
Yeah, I think we kind of covered it. On the specific question at the bottom of Booking.com, obviously Booking, Expedia, and all the platforms are heavily investing now, integrating AI in their system. So I think it's an open race between the existing players. They're not staying still. They're obviously working on their solutions to implement that. And there's a lot of exciting new players coming out, right? So I think it's both. It's not that new players in AI will replace the existing booking platforms. The booking platform is getting very active there.
Another super interesting thought is how much intermediaries, well, whether they'll be intermediaries in travel will be more or less relevant, because could these AI agents go out and find the best offers directly from suppliers, even navigating websites, even robocalling them for rates and availability and information. So the massive amounts of APIs that the OTAs have built and rates that they've negotiated, I think most people would argue there's just huge value there, and those are networks that are really hard to create, and there's speed considerations, and there's the buying power and everything of them to get discounts and whatnot. But just another, again, thing that I love to think about and talk to people about, just how these things could go in different directions. Conversational UI against traditional UI. Okay, so we kind of touched on that too. Norm, someone asked, what's the best corporate travel planning application on the market?
I can't comment on specific applications. I will say that every single one of the corporate applications has a lot of improvements that need to come down line. And they're all aware of that, whether it's content, whether it's interface. But, if you think about it, if you can't even, on some platforms, historically, you weren't even identified as your status with an airline so that you didn't see the display. And this is the older platforms. You didn't see the display of the preferred seats you could get because of your status. If we're not even at that, if that is now an enhancement in a new system, we're really behind the curve as far as trying to keep up with the way, especially the leisure market looks at travel and the way the ease of booking. So I'm afraid I don't have a single winner or a single shining star, but I think there's a lot of opportunities to change things, and it's all around content and the ability to deliver content that's relevant to the individual. And then, we'll see whether the integrations with calendars and with Teams and other types of corporate platforms really end up taking off. I think the market acceptance is still a little bit questionable for me right now. We'll have to see if that really ends up being a value to the market.
Yeah. I think we answered all the questions. Marcus, I see you addressed Tavishi's question about airports. A couple of people asked about sharing the presentation. I'm not sure about the deck itself, but certainly the video will be posted on YouTube where the whole presentation will be visible. Yeah, I think we're good. So I just had a couple more things. So as I had mentioned, just wanted to share a little bit more detail about how you can access the trend reports. So if you are a research client of ours, you would already have access in our online library to the reports. When you go to search the library, you can use the technology and innovation filter. Excuse me. If you're not a client, you can still go to our website. You can purchase the bundle of all 6 reports, or you can buy any report individually. You can use the search feature on our site and that filter for technology and innovation. But for everyone, you could also just Google Phocuswright Tech Trends 2024. At least that landing page for the bundle should come up, and it links to all the reports. Or just Google any of the report titles that we had showed. And then last thing, I hope to see people at any of our upcoming events. We have our semifinals of our global startup pitch competition on August 15th. That'll be an online event. Just search for it and you can register to attend and watch the pitches. There'll be 16 great companies pitching from around the world. And on November 19th, we'll be revealing our annual list of Hot 25 travel startups for the following year. So keep an eye out for that. And November 19th also kicks off our annual global conference in Arizona. And a quick reminder that if you're interested in attending, ticket prices go up over time. So it is cheaper to register early. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you so much to our analysts for doing a great job presenting the trends and staying on to answer those questions thoroughly. Hope to see everyone at one of our upcoming events soon, or maybe on LinkedIn. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you all.